They say the human mind shields you from unbearable trauma, that there's a merciful threshold where shock takes over and numbs you to the horror. That's not entirely true. Your mind absorbs everything, every detail, every scream cutting through ash-thick air. Every moment you realize that the people you knew are gone, and you might be next. The mercy isn't in forgetting, it's in the distance. You become an observer of your own nightmare. My name is William. I'm 17 years old. At least, I was when this began. Time loses meaning when your world collapses. This isn't metaphorical. I'm not talking about personal loss or disappointment. I'm talking about the literal end of everything I'd ever known. The physical destruction of a city, the unraveling of civilization in real time. I'm documenting this because someone needs to understand what happens to the human mind during total systemic collapse. What it's like to watch society reduce to its most primal elements. To discover that everything you thought was permanent is actually terrifyingly fragile. The death toll was impossible to calculate. Our city had a population of 300,000 before the disaster. How many survived? Hundreds? Fewer? I stood in what my phone's GPS insisted was my neighborhood, but nothing supported that claim. No houses, no streets, no recognizable landmarks. Just an endless expanse of gray debris, all of it looking identical. Pulverized, anonymous. The corner store where I'd bought school supplies last week? Gone. The high school where I'd just finished junior year, where I'd been stressing about college applications? Obliterated. The park where my sister Emma and I used to play as kids? The trees were ash. My sister. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Where was Emma? The river, the ancient geological feature that had defined our city's geography for millennia, had evaporated, literally boiled away. The exposed riverbed revealed decades of accumulated debris. Shopping carts, rusted vehicles, things that had been hidden underwater for years, now laid bare. The hill overlooking our city, the one we'd hiked every autumn, had revealed its true nature: a dormant volcano. It must have been sleeping for thousands of years. Not anymore. Molten rock poured down its slopes in continuous streams, an unstoppable river of destruction that consumed everything in its path. It moved with terrible purpose, transforming our familiar landscape into something alien and hostile. I tried to force my brain to accept what I was seeing, but the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. My mind kept searching for familiar reference points that no longer existed. What disturbed me most was that I couldn't distinguish between the living and the dead. Everything existed in the same state of devastation. The boundary between what was animate and what was inanimate had blurred beyond recognition. People moved past me, survivors, technically, but they looked more like automatons. Eyes vacant, movements mechanical. They walked with purpose, but without awareness, completely detached from what they were stepping over. I didn't look down too carefully. Some things are better left unprocessed. Most survivors were barefoot. Their shoes had burned away or fallen apart in the chaos. They left dark footprints in the ash, and I tried not to think about what was causing that darkness. I looked at my own body with clinical detachment. Cuts on both arms, bruises across my torso, burns on my left forearm, all caked with dirt and dried blood. I should have been in serious pain. The injuries looked severe, but I felt nothing. Complete numbness. My nervous system had shut down non-essential functions. Pain was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. This is what extreme trauma does to you. It doesn't make you stronger. It severs the connection between your body and your conscious mind, leaving you functioning on autopilot while some part of you watches from a great distance. I realized I was had been walking for some time without consciously deciding to. I joined the exodus, moving in the same direction as everyone else, almost running actually. Something behind us felt dangerous. Maybe it was just instinct, or maybe we all sensed on some primal level that the destruction wasn't finished, that whatever had done this was still active. I kept my eyes forward. Some survival mechanism prevented me from looking back. My mind, the one that had been worried about SAT scores and college essays just days ago, had simplified itself to one directive: survive the next hour. Then the hour after that. I noticed I still had my shoes. Those expensive sneakers I'd convinced my parents to buy 3 months ago. Now they were the difference between mobility and crippling injury. I felt grateful, absurdly, inappropriately grateful for footwear while surrounded by mass death. The human mind fixates on small mercies to avoid processing overwhelming horror. I was still processing this strange gratitude when a sound cut through everything else. A wail. High-pitched, primal. The kind of sound that bypasses rational thought and triggers something deep in your brainstem. The sound every human recognizes instantly as distress. A woman who'd passed me minutes earlier had stopped. She was the source of that terrible sound. The entire exodus paused. Even people operating on pure survival instinct turned. That cry demanded attention at a neurological level. My child! Please, someone help my child! She was pointing down a steep embankment with a trembling, burned hand. Many eyes, including mine, followed her gesture. At first, I only saw runoff, dirty water flowing down the slope. Then I saw what was obstructing it. A small body. A girl, maybe 13 or 14. The water had to flow around her to continue its descent. The girl wasn't moving. Someone nearby whispered a name. Tracy. The information spread quickly through the small crowd. She'd slipped during the chaos, fallen down the embankment, hit her head on a rock, gone before she stopped rolling. The mother's cries intensified, became something beyond language, beyond grief. This was the sound of a human psyche shattering in real time. Tears ran down my face, the first emotional response I'd had since the disaster began. Her anguish had broken through my shock, pierced the protective numbness. I was functionally helpless. I wanted to climb down that embankment and retrieve Tracy's body, to give this woman some small dignity. But I didn't have the strength. I could barely keep myself standing. The woman's eyes found mine, locked onto them. She was pleading wordlessly, asking me to undo the irreversible, to fix what couldn't be fixed. That look burned itself into my memory, not as something I can recall, as something that fundamentally changed my neural pathways. Several people tried to help her stand. They used the inadequate words people always use in these situations. She's at peace now. She didn't suffer. Comforting lies, because the truth, that a child died terrified and alone for no reason, is unbearable. She refused to stand, pushed them away, collapsed fully onto the ground, breathing slowly and deliberately, as if each breath required conscious effort. Her tears carved clean paths down her face, exposing dark skin beneath the gray ash covering. The contrast was stark. Evidence of her humanity against evidence of apocalypse. But the exodus couldn't stop. Not for one person's grief, no matter how profound. We were all fleeing something larger than her tragedy. One by one, people stood up and continued. Nobody looked back to check if she followed. Nobody waited. We'd become a herd, and herd dynamics are brutal. The individual doesn't matter, only the collective survival. The weak get left behind. It's not cruelty, it's biology. I wanted to stay, wanted to be the person who didn't abandon her. But I kept walking, because staying meant dying, and every cell in my body was screaming to live. This is what disaster does to morality. It doesn't make people evil. It just makes ethical choices impossibly expensive. And most of us can't pay the price. I kept walking, and I've never forgiven myself for it. Maybe an hour after leaving the grieving mother, time had become impossible to track. I experienced something I'd never truly felt before. Real hunger. Not the mild discomfort of skipping a meal. This was cellular, systemic. My body had exhausted its readily available energy and was beginning to consume itself. The sensation started as an ache in my stomach, but quickly spread. Within minutes, it became all-encompassing. Every thought filtered through this primal need. Food. I needed food. Not wanted, needed. Biological imperative overriding everything else. The pain was intense, but I could manage pain. The weakness was different. My muscles were failing. Each step required conscious mental effort. Lift leg, move forward, set down, repeat. I was sweating profusely despite having no water to spare. My body was burning its own tissue for fuel, producing heat as a metabolic byproduct. The chemical process of starvation was accelerating. My thoughts became fragmented, obsessive. Food. The word repeated endlessly, drowning out everything else. I started having sensory distortions. Thought I smelled cooking meat. No, just burning plastic. Thought I saw food on the ground. No, just rocks. My brain was generating phantom sensations, desperately trying to satisfy an unsatisfiable need. I began falling behind the main group. My pace had slowed to a stumble. The gap widened. 10 feet, 20, 50. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out as a hoarse rasp. My throat was too damaged by ash-filled air. The sound barely carried. I cried. Not sobbing, I didn't have the moisture or energy for that. Just an internal groan. My mouth moved, forming words that had no sound. I thought about just stopping. About sitting down in the ash and letting my body finally shut down. It seemed easier than continuing. Easier than fighting. The human body can survive roughly 3 weeks without food under optimal conditions. But I had none of those conditions. No rest, no water, serious injuries, extreme stress. I probably had days at most, maybe hours. Then I saw them. Thin columns of smoke rising in the distance. Camps. People had established camps, which meant they'd stopped running, which suggested some degree of safety. And camps meant fire. Fire meant the possibility of food. The sight triggered something in my brain, a surge of hope. Probably artificial, probably just neurotransmitters, but it didn't matter. I smelled something. Could have been real, could have been my imagination, but it smelled like cooking meat. My failing body found reserves I didn't know existed. Adrenaline, most likely. That final desperate burst before complete system failure. I moved toward those smoke columns faster than I'd moved in hours. I reached the camp. It was less an organized settlement and more an area where people had collapsed from exhaustion. Bodies everywhere, sitting, lying down, some in positions that looked disturbingly permanent. Nobody looked up when I arrived. Nobody acknowledged me. Everyone was too consumed by their own survival. I followed the smoke trails to their source, found a small fire, found bones nearby. Something had been cooked here recently. But whatever meat had been there was gone, consumed. Nothing left but charred bone and the lingering smell. I collapsed next to the fire anyway. The warmth felt good against my skin. I was shivering, I realized. Shock. My body temperature was dropping despite the heat all around us. I don't remember deciding to close my eyes. Consciousness just faded out. Boom! The explosion was so violent, it felt physical, like being struck in the chest. I jerked awake, heart racing, body flooding with adrenaline. I had no idea if I'd been unconscious for minutes or hours. The sky looked unchanged, that same apocalyptic orange-gray that had replaced normal daylight. My vision was blurred, everything obscured by thick, dark smoke. But this smoke was different from before. More aggressive, more immediate, more threatening. The camp had erupted into chaos. People tearing down shelters, grabbing whatever they could carry, running in panic. Then I understood why. The ocean and rivers had burst their banks. But this wasn't normal flooding. Water was erupting from the ground itself, geysers shooting up from cracks in the earth, as if some massive underground reservoir had been catastrophically breached. And simultaneously, in complete violation of basic physics, lava was flowing right alongside the water. Rivers of molten rock running parallel to rivers of water. They should have neutralized each other. The water should have cooled the lava. The lava should have vaporized the water. They didn't. Fire and water worked together, consuming everything with terrifying efficiency. I watched a man get caught between both forces. The water swept him off his feet, carried him directly into a lava flow. He disappeared instantly. The human brain mercifully shuts down when trauma exceeds its processing capacity. But the fire and water weren't the worst threat. They were just symptoms of something deeper. The earth itself was fracturing. Massive fissures were opening across the landscape in rapid succession. The ground was splitting apart, creating chasms hundreds of feet deep. And from these openings came jets of flame, shooting upward with tremendous force. It looked exactly like humanity's ancient descriptions of hell. Fire and brimstone, the earth opening to swallow the wicked. I'd thought those were metaphors. They weren't. I turned around, actually looked back at what we'd been fleeing from. The destruction was advancing in waves, systematic. The cracks spread in patterns, almost as if following some blueprint. Buildings that had survived the initial catastrophe were collapsing into the newly formed chasms. The few remaining tree stumps toppled and disappeared. Everything was being swallowed, as if the planet was erasing all evidence that humanity had ever existed here. The fire erupting from the chasms was so intense, it created its own weather. Heated air rose rapidly, generating powerful updrafts. Ash and debris were pulled upward, then rained back down kilometers away. A self-sustaining cycle of destruction. Even from a distance, I could feel the heat intensifying. My exposed skin was burning. The burns I already had were worsening. I stood there, unable to move. Every survival instinct should have been driving me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was locked in place. Psychologists call this acute dissociative response. Your consciousness separates from your body when reality becomes too overwhelming to process. You become a spectator to your own experience. The ground continued breaking apart. Every structure, every remaining piece of the familiar world was disappearing into the void. Nothing resisted. Nothing survived. The earth was reclaiming everything with absolute efficiency. A massive dust cloud rose from all this destruction, carried by the wind created by the thermal chaos. The thick particles made it impossible to see more than a few feet. We had to shut our eyes or risk permanent damage. I stood in darkness behind my closed eyelids, waiting. The ground rumbled beneath my feet. The sound was deafening, a deep bass frequency you felt in your chest more than heard. When I finally tried to move, I couldn't. My feet were stuck. I looked down and saw that thick mud, created by the mixing of water, ash, and pulverized earth, had formed around my shoes and hardened. I was cemented in place. I pulled. Nothing. Twisted. Nothing. The mud held me like concrete. The destruction was still advancing. I could hear it, feel it. The ground cracking, getting closer. And I was trapped, immobile, about to be swallowed. This was it. This was how it ended. 17 years of life culminating in being consumed by a fissure in the earth. I thought about my parents, about Emma, about whether they'd survived or whether I was the last of my family. I thought about all the things I'd never do, never experience, never become. The rumbling grew louder, closer. "William!" A voice, familiar, impossible. Through the thick dust, through the chaos, I heard my name. I forced my eyes open to slits, squinting against the abrasive air. Something was descending through the smoke. A machine. A helicopter. The rotor wash was creating vortexes in the ash-filled air, temporarily clearing visibility. And there, leaning out of the open side door, reaching down with an outstretched hand, my father. Relief flooded through me so intensely, it was almost painful. My father. He'd found me. I wasn't going to die stuck in hardened mud while the world collapsed. "Grab my hand!" he shouted over the noise. The rotor blades, the rumbling earth, the rushing wind. "Now, William!" I reached up, straining every muscle. Our fingers touched. Missed. Touched again. Then his hand locked around my wrist with that familiar, reassuring grip. The grip that had taught me to ride a bike, that had steadied me when I learned to swim, that had been there for every milestone. He pulled. I felt the suction as the mud released my feet. I was lifted off the ground just as the earth beneath me split open, revealing a chasm of fire that would have been my grave. Dad hauled me into the helicopter cabin with strength born of pure parental desperation. I tumbled inside, gasping, overwhelmed by the sudden safety. "You're okay," Dad said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "We've got you, son. You're safe now." And there was Mom, sitting in one of the passenger seats, looking at me with that warm smile that meant home and safety and everything good in the world. Her face was clean, impossibly clean, given what we'd all been through. Not a trace of ash or dirt. Her clothes were pristine, undamaged. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I thought I'd never see you again. Where's Emma? Did she—" "Shh," Mom said gently. "Everything's going to be fine now, William. We're together. We're safe." I wanted to believe her. Desperately wanted to believe her. But something felt wrong. Something my exhausted, traumatized brain was struggling to identify. I looked around the helicopter cabin more carefully. Military style, utilitarian. The kind of aircraft you'd see in rescue operations. But something was missing. I looked toward the cockpit. Both seats were empty. No pilot, no co-pilot. Just vacant seats and controls moving on their own. The stick shifting, pedals pressing, as if operated by invisible hands. "Dad?" My voice rose with returning panic. "Dad, who's flying this helicopter?" He didn't answer, just kept holding me, that same reassuring smile on his face, fixed, unchanging. I looked at Mom. She had the identical expression, the exact same smile. Not relieved, not concerned about the pilot situation, just smiling. Frozen. "Mom? Dad? Who's piloting?" They didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge the question. Just sat there with those identical, unnatural smiles. And then I saw it through the front windscreen. A massive wall of swirling darkness on the horizon. A cyclone of such immense size it seemed to fill half the sky. And we were flying directly toward it. Not turning, not ascending, just heading straight into its center. "Dad!" I screamed, pointing at the approaching storm. "The cyclone! We have to turn!" But my father just sat there, that frozen smile locked on his face. My mother, too. Both of them staring at me with those fixed expressions. Their eyes were open but lifeless, like dolls, like mannequins posed in a scene. I lunged toward the cockpit, desperate to reach the controls, but my body moved in slow motion, as if moving through thick water. The harder I tried, the slower I moved. The cyclone grew larger. I could see the outer bands now, massive vortexes of debris spinning at impossible speeds. Trees, parts of buildings, vehicles tumbling like toys. We were seconds from impact. "No!" I shouted. "Please, no!" The helicopter hit the outer edge of the storm. The world became chaos, spinning, tumbling, no sense of up or down. The sound was overwhelming, a roar that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I was thrown against the cabin wall. Through the open door, I could see the ground far below, spinning wildly. Fire and water and earth, all mixing together in an apocalyptic blur. My parents sat perfectly still through all of it, still smiling, their eyes locked on me with that horrible, empty expression. Not reacting to the violence, not acknowledging the danger, just staring. The helicopter tumbled deeper into the storm's center, and I screamed. Screamed until my throat was raw, screamed until